Hello, everyone. I am Brad Shimon. I am the Chief Analyst for AI Platforms at Omdia, a research firm, and it is my absolute pleasure to be to have joining me today, David Cox, who is the VP for AI Models at IBM. He's also the director for the IBM/MIT Watson AI Lab. David, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks, Brad. It's great to be here.
Very good. And we're just going to go through a couple of short questions, you and I. And to begin, I'd like to talk about something that takes up quite a bit of every day for me, which is trying to keep up with all of the AI news, in particular, the Gen AI news. And so many models appearing every day, it seems, right now. I actually checked Hugging Face just a few minutes before we jumped on the phone and was not shocked to see that in the last 10 minutes, there were no fewer than 30 new models to choose from.
Exciting times.
It's interesting to think about why that is. And you can see when you look deeply into what these models are doing, and what we're seeing is something that has started going back to maybe mid 2023, where we figured out we didn't actually need 175 plus billion parameters to get the job done with generative AI models. And since then, we've really been optimizing and creating a lot of new opportunities to target specific outcomes with these models. And so Given that, which is, encompasses a lot of territory in terms of how you train, how you deploy, how you quantize, et cetera, these things, what, in your opinion, is this evolution? Where is it leading us? How are models going to change if they're changing, every few minutes over the next couple of years?
Yeah, that's a great question. And maybe a way to start framing that is to look, before we project the future, let's look at what's happened in this last couple crazy years. So you mentioned, 175 billion plus parameter models. There's an interesting trend that's been holding pretty consistently where sort of last year's really big model is being outperformed by much more modest size, 10x or even smaller model today. And it's easy to forget that, 2 years ago, we had 500 billion parameter models out there. And now there are 8 billion parameter models that can perform just as well. So I think one of the trends we're going to see is that, these frontier scale models, they're not going to stop. People are going to keep pushing on that vector. But I think what we're going to see is that for many of the things that people really want to do in business in particular that you need to do can be serviced by much more, compact models. And we're not even necessarily talking about a trade-off in many cases. It's just we're getting better and better at stuffing more and more good stuff into smaller models. And those smaller models are cheaper to run. They consume less energy. They're faster. They require less, the exotic hardware that we have to buy to run these things. So I think that trend is going to just continue and continue and continue. And, in many cases, I think also we're going to see more and more specialization of those models. And I want to be careful in saying that, because I don't mean specialization all the way down to a specific task, like a model that just does one thing. That's the old way I was. We don't want to go back there. But rather specialization to the domain. Like, do I need my HR chatbot to know advanced physics? That's just.
I hope not.
Yeah, I hope not. Maybe so there's some kind of HR somewhere that needs that, but certainly not in most of the businesses we deal with. So, what we've been focusing on is how do we pack a lot of punch into smaller models, while at the same time making sure they're really, really good at the things that people do need to do with them, like, understanding of, business concepts and HR concepts and law and finance and the kinds of things that businesses really need, which is a little bit separate from some of the things that we're getting, push on that side. There's nothing wrong with that, but for actual practical use, it's something you want that's different. So I think we're going to see that trend continue, and we're going to keep seeing whatever capabilities the models have on the large scale just being packed down in more and more intelligent ways as we collectively as a field figure out how to do this stuff.
Yeah, well, as an enthusiast, I do enjoy being able to actually run some of these models locally. And I'd actually like to dig into that second type you talked about a little bit, if you don't mind, David, to talk about that sort of not all the way down to a specific task, but some domain expertise. I think when I looked through the release of Granite 3.0, which IBM just released a little bit ago, a family of models, the update to that, that you mentioned in the document, the announcement document, fit for purpose. Can you explain a little bit more for the folks watching what that means exactly in terms of how you're building these models?
Yeah, that's a great question. Fit for purpose, there's a couple dimensions to that. So on one hand, we want the model to be really good at the things that businesses need, right? So, and these are categories of knowledge and categories of skill that might not be on the radar of a consumer, a consumer-facing company, like many of their social media company, that kind of thing. We see, IBM has a huge range of customers, all the biggest, some of the biggest companies, financial institutions, you name it, work with us, and we get to see what they're trying to do with these things. And we're in this interesting place where, on one hand, the model knows a lot of things that they don't need. On the other hand, they can struggle, or you need to write these, like essay long prompts to coerce them into doing what you need in the domains that are, commonplace across many, big business, enterprise, medium, small businesses. So fit for purpose on that end means it should be good at the things that, roughly speaking, your customers want to do with these models. And, not a exotic concept, but, it's a very pragmatic one. The other piece of it has to do with sort of everything else about the model. How was it trained? Like, what was that data? Is the provider willing to tell you what that data was? In many cases, the standard that's emerged is that they are not. In many cases, they won't tell you even a broad granular, even that's incredibly broad granularity, what the data is. It's complete black box. Is that fit for purpose in a context, in a regulated industry or in an industry where reputation, most companies care about their reputation. And if there's data in there that's problematic, that you just don't want that to be in there. So there's a level of transparency that goes into what makes it fit for purpose for business. And then the third sort of leg of that stool has to do with licensing. Are you free to do what you want to do with that model? Now, there's certainly a segment of the market, a significant segment of the market we're just going to have everything behind an API, and you're going to interact with the API. That's okay, but in many cases you'd like to bring it in, customize it. In many cases, there are customers who want to run on-prem because the data they work with is sensitive, and they want some more control. We're in a stage where we're getting to the point where we're going to exhaust all the public data that's available out there, and put it into models. And models in many ways are like a representation of the data. But the data inside your own business, the stuff that makes you special, that's your competitive differentiation, usually none of that's in your model. In many cases, you want to be very careful about sending that over to an API endpoint that you don't control. So there's a lack of freedom there. There's open source models, but then there's open models, but something has emerged there, which is a little bit funny, that each provider, by and large, is producing their own kind of specially baked open license, which has all kinds of funny restrictions on it. Like, you have to name your model this if you do this, or you can't do this with the model, and things like that. So the other piece is the model licensed in a way that's friendly to business? Can you take this, use it for commercial purposes, do whatever you need, build on it, extend it, put your own data into it? And that's the line that we're taking, the strategy we're taking. All of Granite 3.0 is released under an Apache 2 license. It's just the most well understood, this is no funny business, just open. And in many cases, that's another part of what it makes it fit for purpose for business.
I like that very much. And it is a sticking point for analysts like myself who always try to put things in clean little boxes to note that the community license and the open source license are somehow getting mixed up in the marketing message from a lot of vendors right now. And I think that does a disservice to the buyers, because I think in the enterprise, what practitioners crave perhaps more than anything is consistency and transparency, and you lose that if if suddenly you're at the whim of the model maker who might change their licensing at any moment. That's not what you want. So obviously making the right decision is critical, and it depends upon selecting a model that, as you just said, is fit for purpose according to a pretty wide span of measures. My goodness, we just talked about just like five of them there, and each of those has their own sub evaluations that would take a lot of time to go through. So I'm curious, how do you think companies can best go about choosing their models wisely? Because to basically quote Indiana Jones, I think it was the second film about the knight who chose poorly when picking up the cup of Christ and aged rapidly. Companies don't want that to happen. They want to be able to pick a model that they know they're going to be successful with quickly, and that model will be consistent over time, and it'll do what they need within the parameters they require. So sorry for that lengthy question, but David, how do we do that?
Yeah, the aging rapidly thing is quite a visual, but I think we've all been there. I think we've all felt that. Yeah, no, I mean, you do have to choose wisely. So one of the reasons for that is anyone who's worked with models, and particularly as we move into these sort of agentic frameworks where you have lots of prompts and you're running through multiple prompts and calling functions and things. You incur technical debt when you write those prompts, right? Like and in many cases they're quite brittle, like, a little bit of, a punctuation here, a little fiddling there. So while you'd like to be able in a situation, and maybe we'll, as a field, eventually evolve to a situation where you can really just swap them in and out, it's no big deal. In practice, you want to change as little as, if you don't have to change, you shouldn't change. And it's fine if people are in an MVP stage, and it's also fine to start with a big model and then work your way down. A lot of people start with an MVP with something that would be actually quite expensive to deploy, but they chose the big model because it made their lives easier. But the reality is, if you want it to be economical, you might need to move to a smaller model. And you also want to, be consistent across, generations of what you're doing. You'd like to take advantage of the fact that the models are improving and have some consistency there. So I think the choice of model, it has some import, and people should take it seriously. And you should also look at those kind of non-functional requirements that come with it, like the license, you don't want to put a lot of effort into something and then discover down the road, actually, no, I need to change because the lawyers said we can't use this, or this wasn't the right choice, or, a news story broke and now we're not comfortable, with what's in there. So I think should be a deliberative process. I think multiple stakeholders should be involved. I think companies are rapidly figuring out that they need to have some kind of governance more broadly over the process of qualifying models and making sure that all the stakeholders are involved. Those, whatever number, I think you said 30 models that were listed.
10 minutes.
I think the last time I looked at like 15,000 different llama fine-tuned, and that was a while ago. I'm sure there's quite a few more. Most of those shouldn't be in serious consideration. They're like, you have no idea what's inside those models. You have no idea what people did to them. You have no idea anything. And they're also a lot of them are just kind of people, playing around, experimenting. It's totally good that exists, but realistically, you're going to have a choice between a couple of different sort of choices you could make. And, I do think that tying oneself to one provider behind, a software as a service, like behind an API endpoint, that dramatically limits your freedom of movement too. You just don't have as many choices. Once you start incurring, working against that, then you kind of get locked in, which is exactly what every business wants. They want to lock in their customers if they can. So I think choosing open is good, but that's obviously something that every customer should evaluate, and you should have a deliberative process around that. Understanding the governance of the model, the transparency of the model, everything about the model. The more you know, the better. So I think that process should be taken seriously upfront. It's not a let people do a bunch of prototyping and building and then decide, we have to swap this out for something else. This should be something that people do along the way. And I'm not saying you can't switch. Obviously it's possible to switch. Technical debt can be retired. But I think people should pay attention, and I would say that the field is starting to mature more and more, so that there's good
Yeah.
options available. I think we're going to see some thinning out in some of the startup space, and that's normal. But there's a good set of options, but people should take it seriously and really think through all the dimensions of it.
Yeah, that's good advice. And it's interesting. You might think that if you choose wisely and you have a great model, like you picked a frontier model, you can afford it, it's doing everything you need, that you're not going to have the technical debt. But actually, every single revision that's made, every checkpoint that's released is an entirely new day for the prompts that you're sending to those models, even though they're conforming to the exact same prompt template. It's insane. So I know we're getting short on time, but you mentioned something there that I really want to touch on, and that is agentic models and the fact that we're seeing more and more complex workflows in the enterprise where it's not just a single model that is answering a question. Instead, what we're starting to see are models which might be a couple of different approaches. One might be like a mixture of experts where that model has different expertise baked in, if you will. Another is a more framework-oriented arrangement where basically you might have a model that's trying to do the reasoning and the planning and the assignment of tasks to other models or to use other tools. And oh my goodness, it is like this massively like complex but wildly opportunistic opportunity, I should say, that we're faced with right now. What do you think, like, if you're to put on your future looking hat here, what does this whole like obsession we have with agentic models right now, where is that going to lead us in the next couple of years?
That's a great question. I will say I think the movements that are happening are very positive. I used to be a computer science professor before I joined IBM, and I am just a tad cranky about the term agent because I think there is a multi-agent sort of pattern that's been around for a long time in a subfield of AI. It's been looking at multi-agent systems, and it's absolutely a good thing, and we should do research in it and all that. But I think agentic is really kind of covering up at some level, and we can use the word name agentic to apply to anything. Is really that these are systems that don't act in isolation. It isn't just a model. It's an acknowledgement that the model is going to propose other LLM calls. The model is going to propose API calls. And some of the agentic frameworks give you a nice both the paradigms like React and Relu and things like that, and then also the software frameworks that support them give you a way to think about how you might want to do that, and that's very productive and that's good. But I think the real issue is really these systems; these are woven together. The LLM is woven together in some sense with software, and we're building software around the model. And I think, whether we call that agentic or not, in every case, there's lots of things that people call agentic that just don't meet any reasonable definition.
It's just tool use.
It's just tool use, and you call multiple prompts. Like, people will talk about agents collaborating with each other. It's like, dude, you're just sending different prompts to the same exact model. Like, what is this? But I think the broader thing, and I think the thing is that is absolutely good, and I'm really excited to see all the enthusiasm and the innovation that's happening, irrespective of the pattern we use to think about it, is that we're acknowledging that the LLM by itself isn't the whole thing. We need to build it into flows. It needs to be interacting with traditional software. And I think we're going to see that just continue to grow and grow and grow. And we'll get better and better ways of helping us and our limited primate brains to grok what's going on in that space, but also not to hurt ourselves with by making mistakes. So, the story of software has not just been about increasing capability. It's been about creating patterns that we can use to not screw up, not make mistakes, recover from the mistakes when we do make them, understand and manage the complexity of the systems we're building. And I think that's what really, I think, is going to be the durable, lasting thing. I think we'll see patterns come and go. I think, whether we keep calling it agentic or not is really irrelevant. It's just we're acknowledging that these are a piece of something larger. And I think people who have built real applications really quickly discover that, you need to, apply some rules that, because in this jurisdiction, there's a requirement, or in our company, we have this policy. you can write all that in a prompt, or you can just go and like just leave it into the existing rules checking you have. And that kind of acknowledgement and sort of coexistence of LLMs and software, I think is really what we're driving towards. And I think that's very positive.
Yeah, me too. And I am heartened to see companies like IBM investing in the governance of those. So, for example, with What's Next governance, I know you guys are working on adding a sort of systemic view of a solution that would incorporate various models working in concert in an autonomous fashion. And that's really neat. To think about where that might take us. And on that note, I know we have to go, but very quickly, let's do some prognostication. Okay, David. I would love to hear your thoughts on if you're going to fill in the blank. The future of AI models is X. What would that be to you?
Yeah, I mean, just to carry on the themes of our discussion so far, I think it's open and integrated. Like it's integrated into IT. It's not a separate alien entity. I think it's going to be, and I think it's going to be open because open has always won historically, and there's good reasons for that. When things are open, not only are they easier to understand and be transparent about, but it means that communities can contribute and form around them. And yeah, proprietary things can exist. And, there was a moment where there was a decision point of, is Windows going to underpin the internet, or is it going to be Linux? But, just the sheer power of everyone working together, that's really powerful. And I think that's going to be a huge trend. And ultimately, I think that's going to win.
Yeah, I like that view. I also, as a proponent of free and open source software, see in the AI space in particular that's where most of the innovation comes from. It's not just a couple of big vendors, but it is the broader community coming together. So, yeah, that's wonderful, David. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today about these interesting topics. And I hope everyone out there enjoyed what David had to share with us. And this is the end of our episode. Until next time, this is Brad Shimon with Omdia signing off.
Good. Thanks. It was a pleasure.